Okay, welcome back. So this video is all about the second part to the data presentation, analysis and conclusions section. Section 3, essentially. So if you think about where we've come from, you've done your introduction section, which is project design, you've designed your sub-questions, you've done a bit of background research in terms of your literature review, you've come up with some hypotheses, you've done a locational study, you've done a comparative study as well, again, to help you formulate those hypotheses. From these sub-questions, you need to think about how we're going to collect data that answers those sub-questions. That's your methodology section, already complete by now. This is all about what we intend to do when we go into the field. Then we collect our data. That's part of the whole process, isn't it? And then we get a load of numbers, we get a load of words, and then we turn those into visuals and we do some statistical analysis on it. And that was the theme of the last video. So this one is all about the second part to that section, if you like, which is all about the writing about what our findings are. So if we go through what's going to be included, we've got what is that actual written analysis? What does the mark scheme mean by connections? What does it mean by links to wider geography? How do we conclude on our sub-questions? And then what does the mark scheme mean when it says balanced appraisal of your methods and your ethics? What might that look like? Okay, so purpose of the section, right? We've got to describe to the reader what the data says. Yeah, we've got to link our findings together where appropriate. So can we find those interconnections between the data? Linking your findings to wider geography, as we've already established we need to do. And it basically helps us to explain the results. We've got to conclude and determine whether or not our hypotheses were correct. And we've also got to appraise all of the different, well, that's certainly got to appraise your methods and your and your ethics, sorry. Now, the written analysis is nice and simple, really, for our written analysis. I'll just move my head. Um, so it's essentially say what you see. This is the first part to it. This is the a lot of students have come to me in the past and said I'm really struggled with the starting of this section. It is literally just say what you see. But all you need to really see is an example of how that might look, and then you'll be off. You'll be away with it. Um, and essentially, what we're doing here, we're establishing: do we see trends? Do we see relationships? Do we see differences? Do we see any anomalies? It's descriptive in the first instance. Yeah, it's very descriptive, and also we're also saying if we don't see trends, if we don't see relationships, if we don't see differences, if we don't see anomalies, it's basically saying what we see or what we don't see. And you can also say that we both see this, but we don't see this. Okay, it's establishing what the data is telling us. It's nice and simple. So it's descriptive. We're not going into much depth at this stage. So what might that look like? Yeah. So if we have a look at this over here, I'll just move my head temporarily. This is an example, very, very, very common example in a lot of projects that I see where we say what we see. We've got distance from the town centre versus environmental quality. The researcher was obviously trying to establish whether there was a relationship between environmental quality in the city centre, in the central business district, whatever you want to call it, or the town centre, it might be the village centre, and whether the environmental quality improved. Now, we can see it, can't we? We can literally see that the data shows a positive correlation. This is the kind of language that you want to be using. Yeah, so we'll just quite simply describe. The data shows there is a positive correlation between distance from the town centre and environmental quality. Now, some students would stop there. The better students would then quote. Yeah, because this is going to be part of your analysis in paper 3 as well. You've got to quote from the figure. Yeah, so as you can see in figure 1, at a distance, in the town centre, which spans to up to 2.5, the highest score obtained is 14 and the lowest is 4, suggesting low scores across all categories in your environmental quality survey. Yeah, and then we've got the significance of that difference as well in the next line, where it scores in the suburban areas, 15 kilometres from the centre, are more than 5 times higher than the town centre. Yes, it's not just that they're higher; they're 5 times higher. So again, it's all about what do you see and how can you gain more marks by giving that more in detailed overview of the significance of the data as well. Okay, so that is a prime example of a say what you see. So you're just doing that. Do you see any positive correlations? Do you see any differences? Do you see any relationships that are established in the visuals that you've created? Do you see variation? Do you see volatility? All of these words are things that you need to think about using to describe almost like the shapes that have been presented by your raw data. Okay, so that's the say what you see part. The next part of this is thinking about are there any relationships to other data presentation that you've done? So you might want to show this as an overall thing, but then that might be on a different page. And look, we can see the relationship. So here, down here, you can see that a lot across litter, traffic, noise, cleanliness, green space, it scores low across the board. And this was also demonstrated by the radar chart. Yeah, the polar radar chart there. Or it might be that you've got the anomalies over here that you've picked out, these things here that don't quite conform to the trend. So it means there's probably variation within the data set, and one of the or one or two of the variables within the environmental quality brought the score down. So we're explaining these anomalies as well. We're seeing like, look, there's a trend here. Yeah. And look, even sometimes I know a lot of you have done photo elicitation or kind of just annotated photographs. Link the annotated photographs to the various points on your data sets. It's like, look, environmental quality is low. Let's look at the qualitative analysis because this is a quantitative bit of analysis. Does it link with some of the quantitative analysis? And you might want to annotate this. Look, cleanliness wise, it scored very low because look at all the graffiti. Litter, it scored very low because look at all that litter. Yeah. Traffic, very low. We can't see this, but the road behind was jam-packed with cars. Well, you wouldn't say jam-packed, obviously, but this is what it means in the mark scheme when it says, are there any connections to your other data sets? And you've got to see whether they do exist. Okay, so again, higher scoring students are the ones that make those connections between everything that they've seen, rather than just presenting all of your charts and graphs in isolation. Draw the connections between them. Then the next thing is very, very, very important. Again, if you want to get into those higher mark brackets, yeah. So far, if we just summarize where we've come from, we've done a descriptive summary of what the data says. You know, positive correlation, and we quote from the data. That might form 4 or 5 sentences. Directly below that, we might think, okay, are there any connections with the data sets? Let's just display that now while we're in this section. And then below that, we've got this bit here, which is now let's explain the trend that we see here from a theoretical standpoint. Now, this is the point where you're going to bring in, or you could potentially bring in, things that you've already discussed, authors that you've already read about, or theories that you've already read about and described in your literature review. And this is the reason why doing a strong literature review is going to really help you in this section here. Now, what might be the case is that you've got some theory there in the literature review, and you can just transfer it straight to here and say, look, this relates to the theory discussed by Jones et al. 2022. That's a made-up reference, by the way, so don't quote that. And you could say, as mentioned in the literature review, about how in urban centres that experience the spiral decline, environmental quality has suffered and local authorities have lacked the funding necessary to regenerate areas effectively. We've linked it to wider geography and wider theories. Yeah. Um, and again, you could link it to numerous bits of theory. So the more wider theory you can link it to, again, the more credit you're going to gain in this section. That's all it is. It's just kind of stylistically going through the different elements of the mark scheme and making sure that you're meeting them. Okay. And it might be the case. So obviously, we've had the case where you've discussed something in your literature review and it transfers straight to this section. Easy job. Or you might have some data and you've not had a chance to look at that in your literature review. It says this wasn't discussed in the literature review, but I've since looked into this data and looked at the theory about why there might be some anomalies, particularly in suburban areas. And from reading this over here, let's call it Smith et al. 2008, again, in some suburban areas, this isn't the case because maybe some suburban areas are sinker states, let's say. Um, so it's, you don't have to just transfer the theory that you've already got in your literature review to this point here. You can use fresh theory. Either way, you are linking to theory, and if you're using fresh theory, that just shows the person marking it that you're also consulting wider references, and that can only stand in your favor. Okay, so that is right now. So you've got per sub question. This is, by the way. So you go sub question, data presentation, statistical analysis, describe the data. make connections with other data sets, link to the wider theory. Yeah, see it all as a chain of stuff that you've got to do. And then we get on to finally the conclusions. All right. So in your literature review, in your introduction, some of you may have gone down this route where you've got an alternative hypothesis and a null hypothesis. Some of you may have just simply stated what your hypothesis is. Yeah. Very scientific approaches will go down this route here. So there's an alternative, which is there's a relationship between distance from the sound sensor and environmental quality. Your null hypothesis, there's no relationship between distance from the sound sensor and environmental quality. Yeah, so what it says here is the conclusion, my data presentation shows that there appears to be a positive correlation between distance from the sound sensor and environmental quality, meaning we can accept the alternative hypothesis. Spearman's rank calculation generated an R value that showed a strong positive correlation and that we can accept that the relationship is not due to chance with a 95% degree of certainty, meaning a causal link. Okay, so there is that causal link. Now, this question will help you answer the overall question, won't it? Yeah, it will help you answer the overall question, but we're not going to address that in this section. In this section, all we're doing is concluding on the sub-questions. Okay, so and even if you've only got one of your hypotheses, you've not arranged it in this alternative null, that doesn't matter as long as you've got some form of prediction or hypothesis, then you've got something to conclude on, haven't you? And that's not particularly long, is it? It's not particularly long at all, but it's made reference to the statistical analysis, and the best conclusions will do that. They will contain reference to whatever you've done, students T, chi-squared, Spearman's rank, Pearson's product moment, whatever you've done, if you refer to it in the conclusions, your conclusions are becoming more scientific. Okay? And you notice there in the conclusion, we're not making any bold claims. You don't want to make bold claims about there is absolutely a 100% link between this and that. No, you can only conclude on what the data tells you. So essentially, what's the conclusion? What does the data tell you? Okay. And it might be the conclusion might be that there isn't a relationship and that that's been proven by the statistical analysis as well. Because remember, your statistical analysis can prove that there isn't a relationship as well as proving that there is a relationship. Okay. So it's all about, again, once again, thinking about it in terms of that. What am I writing about here? I'm describing the data, I'm making the connections, I'm linking to theory, and I'm concluding on what the answer essentially is to the hypothesis that I've created. Was it correct? And then it's just a case of repeating. Okay, so there it is. Yeah, you'll have access to this PowerPoint. So it's just here, like this. That's the kind of structure that you go through, yeah, per sub-question. Now, again, per sub-question, it's necessary to do a balanced appraisal of your methods, okay? Now, the reason for that is because if you think about it, the conclusion that you've just drawn is based on the data that you've collected. Now, that means then that the numbers have been subject to some flaws along the way. Yeah, there'll be positive aspects of your data collection, but there'll also be negative aspects of your data collection as well. And that's what the marker, whoever's marking your project, will want to see that you can identify. Okay, the key wording in the mark scheme is that word there in green, balanced. It must be balanced. You've got to talk about the positives and the negatives of your data collection method. Okay, because like I said before, it will have strengths and it will have weaknesses. And the next thing to think about is, well, how do we even talk about that? Like, what do we talk about when we're talking about the positives and negatives of data collection? Okay. The mark scheme makes reference to the words utility and validity. Okay, so therefore, you have to make reference to positive aspects under utility, but negative aspects under utility, and positive aspects under validity, and negative aspects under validity. Okay, and if you want to make the marker's job as easy as possible, what you will put those as subheadings. Yeah, so it's very easy to credit. That's what you want to do with the coursework. You want to make it nice and easy for the person who's marking it to give you a good mark. Yeah, and to be able to identify where you are meeting the mark scheme criteria. All right. Now, what do these words mean? Well, utility means kind of usefulness, like how useful was it in achieving the research objectives. So you've got to think about things like cost. Did it cost a lot? You've got to think about the ease of implementation, the ability to gather the relevant data, the adaptability. It's all about kind of when you're in the field, were you able to gather data quickly like that? So you were able to get loads and loads of different samples and therefore make it a little bit more representative. But then on the other hand, you didn't necessarily do that in-depth analysis. Or maybe it was very useful and it allowed you to get quantitative and qualitative data. There's all of these things where you can think about how can I comment on the positive aspects of the usefulness. Yeah. Or you could be thinking about maybe the logistical challenges, how time consuming it might be. It might be really limited as a data collection method. It might only allow you to focus on this rather than a data collection method that can allow you to focus on numerous different variables. So all you're doing is you're thinking about the usefulness, positive elements of its usefulness and negative elements of its usefulness. Okay. And that will be exactly the same with when you are talking about validity. You've got to do positives and negatives. Okay. So this is the degree to which the data collection method accurately measures what it's intended to measure. Yeah. Um, and you've got to think about how this will implement that kind of or affect the accuracy as well. Yeah. So again, things like accuracy, relevance. It is the method that you chose. Is it strictly speaking linked to the question, or could you have chosen a different method that would have linked to the question more? Yeah. So that's the validity. Is it the valid method? Was it filled with bias? Was it consistent? Yeah. Were you consistent in your data collection? It's one of those. So again, a quick search on the internet about what could I comment on in terms of my validity. It's not a copy and paste job here. You're just generating the ideas for what you could potentially comment on with the methods that you adopted. Okay, so I've just got a small example there. So something like a bipolar survey, it's fast. It means you can gather a lot of data, making a sample more representative. You can do it in multiple points very, very quickly with a bipolar survey. It's boom, 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 boom. Scores generated. It's quantitative. You can do statistical analysis on it. Really useful. But if you, the researcher, are conducting it, it may obviously be there may be bias associated with that. Yeah, particularly if maybe you're doing research on your hometown or something like that. All right. So that's your balanced appraisal. You've also got to appraise your ethics, okay? And again, it's a positive and negative style thing. So with each of your specific methods, how ethical were you when you were in the field? Like, so there will be definite positives in terms of how ethical you are. Yeah, I was really ethical because I did X, Y, and Z, and that ensured that I didn't do X, Y, and Z. On the other hand, there were elements to my research where it was impossible for me to damage to not damage ecosystems, let's say. So, you take that into account when you're thinking about the ethics. Again, it's positive and it's negative. This must be balanced, as I've said before. Yeah. So the questions you have to ask yourself are: in what ways were you ethical in your approach? In what ways were you unavoidably unethical? Right. And that concludes it. That concludes it. Um, So the next in this series of videos is the final one for your NEA, which is the overall conclusions and the evaluation section, and that will bring this series of videos to a close. I hope you found them useful.